In this podcast episode, I want to talk about the West's moral confusion about Israel. I want to put to one side for one moment, all of the almost 2 billion Arabs and Muslims that there are around the world, because it doesn't surprise me what side they're taking in this. But what does surprise me is just how many people in the West, in the US, in Australia, in Europe, are taking the side of the Palestinians. I mean, it surprises me, and it doesn't surprise me because Israel has for a long time been the scapegoat, has been the West scapegoat for lots of things, and has been held to a double standard that no other people have been subjected to. And I think most Jews and Israelis are kind of, every time something like this happens, they're sort of devastated by a lot of the response from the West. But at the same time, they're not really surprised because this always happens. But I'm doubly not surprised because I think that there is a huge trend in Western culture, in particular in the past 5 years, that this kind of blaming and scapegoating and double standards with regards to Israel isn't an isolated thing, right? I think we're talking a lot this time around about anti-Semitism and the way that it's rearing its ugly head. And I think that's absolutely the case. There is a lot of anti-Semitism in the world today. But for a lot of Jews and Israelis, as far as I can see, they seem to think that the only reason why so many people in the West are against them is because of anti-Semitism. And I think that's an oversimplification. I think that there are much bigger social trends. I see what's happening between what's happening with the West's reaction to Israel and Palestine right now is part of a much, much, much wider social trend that has been unfolding over the past 5 to 10 years, and that I've been very critical of in private, but never really said anything publicly about. And that is the sort of great awakening and this emergence of sort of woke politics and identity politics on parts of the left, and in particular in the far left. Increasingly, parts of the left are seeing the world through the lens of postmodern thought, which is, among other things, it's a very academic thing, but has percolated through lots of other parts of society as well. But it's a way of looking at the world that sees everyone and everything in terms of victim and perpetrator, or being the oppressed or the oppressor. And it's basically a revision of Marxism to the modern age, because Marxism talked about social class and talked about the proletariat, the working class, that was being oppressed by the ruling aristocratic class and the bourgeoisie. We don't use that terminology anymore today, but that kind of Marxist way of thinking and seeing the world has kind of been grafted onto 21st century politics, but it's been grafted onto our politics in a very different way, in terms of identity politics. So there are clear hierarchies between oppressor and oppressed within this moral framework, where black people are the oppressed and white people are the oppressors, where women are the oppressed and men are the patriarchal oppressors, where gay and trans people are the oppressed and straight and cisgendered people are the oppressors. And we also see it in body positivity, which I've been very, very critical of, and I've been very aware that it's part of a wider identity politics, but where fat people are oppressed and thin people are the oppressors. And this might sound like hyperbole, and many of you might not have thought about it in these terms yet, but this is increasingly becoming the way of seeing the world. And just like in Marxist thought, Marxism, it justified violent revolution by the proletariat over the bourgeoisie, any means necessary to overcome the oppressor class. And increasingly, we are seeing this in Western politics, where anything goes. When it comes to the oppressed, when it comes to the victim, absolutely anything goes. You can get away with absolute murder. You can get away with awful things if you are part of that oppressed class. But if you are part of the oppressor class, you are held to a different set of standards where not only can you not get away with those things, but where every tiny little thing that you do is scrutinized and seen as some form of oppression over the oppressed. And we're ending up in this kind of oppression Olympics where, it's actually becoming fashionable to show your oppression and to show the way that you are victimized and to try to win sort of victim points in this oppression Olympics. If you are a fat, one-legged, black, lesbian, trans, whatever, you win over, a white man who is straight. And then this is having huge impacts also on something that's becoming increasingly fashionable is post-colonialism and criticizing absolutely any country who has a colonial past, even for things that have nothing to do with colonialism. It's creating a huge amount of white guilt. And it's also getting to the point where even the central Western values are being attacked. Values of human dignity, of human rights, of democracy, of diplomacy, of understanding, of conversation, of cooperation. These very values are being attacked, and just like Marxism condoned violent revolution against the oppressor class, we're seeing not only condoning of, but actual active encouragement of any sort of rising up and any sort of violent action against what is today deemed as the oppressor class. And the big problem with this is that it is, whereas it was bound to the academies and the universities not that long ago, it has percolated through massive parts of, in particular, the more moderate left and centrist people who are more politically central, and even into parts of the moderate right. And certain people hold these beliefs, but I think a great deal more people they don't fully agree wholesale with the ideology, but what they do tend to do is this kind of, it has this kind of bandwagoning effect, because people don't want to be seen as, they want to be seen as racist, they don't want to be seen as sexist, they don't want to be seen as anti-trans, they don't want to be seen as fat shaming, they don't want to be seen in that light, and so they go along with a lot of this kind of identity politics, and in order to be seen as good people, which it kind of like appeals to and makes people's sort of best interests sort of work against them. And we also end up with this kind of virtue signaling and parroting of the correct phrases. So in this case, sort of free Palestine and, end the apartheid, and phrases that don't make sense and don't actually have anything to them, but it's the done thing to just parrot those phrases back and to take that side. And all of this ideology of oppressor versus oppressed is just being grafted onto Israel and onto the whole Israel-Palestine conflict, and through this framework, Israelis are seen as the white people, whereas the Palestinians are seen as the black or brown people. The Israelis are seen as the oppressor, colonial power, and the Palestinians as the poor, indigenous population that had their homes taken away. And it's been very, very, very easy for people to weave that narrative because it fits in, it just slots in so neatly to our current identity politics and woke politics that is taking over in the West. Even though it's not true, that it's a simple case of oppressor and oppressed, of colonized versus the colonial powers. It simply isn't true that works, that paradigm works for this situation. But it's very, very easy to say it, and then it's very, very hard to explain why it isn't true. And it fits into people's current paradigm of how the world works. And I want to talk about some of the paradoxes and contradictions and double standards that this whole paradigm creates. So the argument goes that the Palestinians are the oppressed, right? But the huge paradox here is that Jews are the most persecuted group in history. And I want to focus in on a couple of points here. So the pro-Palestine camp makes two completely contradictory claims. They make the claim that, Israel is the colonizing power that came and colonized their land. But they also make the claim that there were never any Jews in the land to start with. And these two things can't be true, right? They can't be true at the same time. They contradict each other. And the fact that there wasn't this big Jewish nation that came along, the state of Israel came along and devoured the Palestinians. That isn't how the timeline of this works. When we talk about native claims to the land, the truth is that both Arabs and Jews have a relevant and a fair claim. And this is why back in 1947 it was split into two. The UN came along and decided to partition the land into an Arab state and into a Jewish state. You've got to remember as well the context of why there were an increasing number of Jews in this area. At that time in 1947, it wasn't that, again, some big colonial power came in. It was that throughout the early 20th century, there were pogroms all over the Arab world where there was a really, really, really big Jewish population. And, of course, Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And Jews were forced to leave their homes throughout all of, many, many, many different Arab nations because they were literally being killed, like very similar to what we saw on October the 7th, which was essentially a pogrom. People were being killed and murdered and slaughtered by the surrounding Arab population, right? By the oppressive Arab, if you want to use this framework, they were very much the oppressed within this oppressor class of the oppressive majority that was attacking them. And every single Israeli has a family history that is somehow affected by this. Just my husband's family, for example, on his maternal grandparents fled the Holocaust as young children, and his paternal grandparents fled Morocco and Algeria, and all the pogroms that were going there. Imagine they were living their lives as sort of well off, not rich, but comfortable people just living in Morocco and Algeria. And because of hatred towards Jews in those areas, they were and people literally being killed and houses being burned down, and sort of big vigilante groups going out against the Jewish population, they were forced to leave, and they got on a boat and they came to Israel with literally nothing. Like they sort of only had a few possessions in their hands, and they were very much displaced people and didn't have anywhere else to go. So you got to remember the context of the 1947 UN partition of this like slither of land was not that there was this big, powerful Jewish nation that came along and said, we want this land. It was dripping in over the course of like 100 or more years of more and more Jews to the area, because they were literally being killed where they came from. So in a sea of Arab nations, I mean, today I think we have 24 Arab nations and one Jewish state. You know, that was still true like 100 years ago. I think there were fewer Arab nations, but all of the Middle East was controlled by and was run by Arab nations with Jewish populations within them. Where are those populations, Jewish populations today? They're either very, very, very small, or they don't exist because they were displaced, because they were kicked out by the Arabs in that land, and the pogroms and the violence that was perpetrated again. So then in 1947, there was the UN partition of the state, and the Arabs were given land and the Jews were given land, so that they would each have their own state. But now people are rewriting history and saying that the Israelis colonized the Arabs, and this absolutely isn't the case. If you actually look at what happened and the steps that were taken, Jews look very much like the oppressed here. When you really look at what happened throughout that period of history. And then it's also I mentioned this part of the history in my last podcast as well, but one day after that partition, so the state of Israel is now one day old, it was attacked by a coalition of, I think, 5 different Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, like the surrounding nations, established countries with huge armies, all attacked simultaneously this one-day-old state of Israel. So again, if you really want to see this through an oppressor lens, which I don't fully agree with, I think that Israel has done a lot of things and as well throughout the history. But if you really want to see it through that lens, you've got to look back to those times and like really see the facts on the ground. And I think it's pretty clear that like that burgeoning Israeli state was the oppressed one in this situation. They had nothing. They were few in numbers, and they were being attacked by these massive nation states. So it's just really interesting how through sort of this modern revisionist lens of history, how Jews, who have been the most persecuted group in history, have now become the oppressor. And it's kind of almost like their strength and their ability to like overcome odds is almost used against them, because when they were attacked by all of those Arab states in I don't know whether it was 1948 after like the creation of Israel. That's what's referred to as like the Israeli War of Independence, right? They fought back. They fought a defensive war, and they somehow managed to win, right? They somehow managed to not all be slaughtered by all of these Arab forces. And then that strength and coordination, where they managed to win in a defensive war when all of the odds are against them, is then used against them nowadays. And we look back as though they were the oppressors and they were the ones that started the war. And I've made the point before that then the Israelis called this the War of Independence, whereas the Arabs call this al-Nakba, the catastrophe, the catastrophe that this very small Jewish state was created alongside a bigger Palestinian state, right? They consider this to be a catastrophe, right? The Jews didn't consider it to be a catastrophe that there was yet another Arab state that was created. They considered it as, great, we've got our land, we've got our independence, we've got our autonomy. And it's interesting how those two things, how the two sides view this differently. And there are so many more examples. I don't want to drag you through or make this like a history lesson, but I do want to give you a couple more concrete examples. So one thing that is being said over and over again is like, you need to give the Arabs their state. You need to give the Palestinians their state. Well, Israel did that in 2005. It left Gaza, I think in 2004 actually, and Hamas was elected in 2005. They have had complete autonomy from Israel since then. The state of Israel removed all the Jews from Gaza. They displaced all the Jews from Gaza. And this is another asymmetry where we talk constantly about the Palestinians that have been displaced. And there have been Palestinians who have been displaced throughout this conflict. I don't deny that at all. But there have been many Jews who have been displaced throughout the history of this conflict, going all the way back to the pogroms and going back to the Holocaust. So many, pretty much every Jew alive today at some point in history has been displaced. Someone in his family has been displaced for him to end up where he is today. So, 18 years ago, Israel left Gaza. Hamas come into power. They've been elected by the people, right? They have a state. They at least have the beginning of a state, right? They don't yet have all the infrastructure that you need to become an actual recognized state. But the past 18 years, they've spent building terror tunnels, building rockets, shooting them into Israel. They keep going on about Israeli oppression and occupation, and they keep using Israeli occupation as a reason for resistance, for violent revolution. Again, within that like Marxist framework, it's completely justified because of Israeli occupation. But Israelis haven't been occupying the Gaza Strip for 18 years. There's been no Israeli presence there, and they have been able to do what they need to do. They've got millions and millions and millions of dollars of aid into that area, and they've used it to build terror tunnels and to build infrastructure to kill Israelis, rather than using it to build like a Ministry of the Interior and a passport office, and to build state structures and functions that would make Gaza function like any other nation state. All the while, they keep on blaming Israel. Like, Israel's responsible for this. The reason why we need to have this violent resistance, the reason why we need to go and kill Israelis, the reason why we need to go and blow up buses, in the Intifada, the reason why we've had these waves of Gazans coming into Israel, killing people and so on, is because of the Israeli oppression and occupation. But that hasn't existed. And again, using this framework of oppressor and oppressed, everything that the Palestinians, that the Gazans, that Hamas do is justified by what the Israelis have done. But it doesn't work the other way round. Nobody says, well, Israel has a right to do this because of these things that they've done. So, for example, when Hamas blow up buses or just stab innocent Israelis, they say it's because of the blockade that's put on us, that we're not allowed to come freely in and out of Israel. But it's actually the other way around. The blockade is put on Gaza, and Israel built a big fucking wall because every time Gazans had the opportunity to come into Israel, they came and they killed people. So Israel had to keep increasing its security, making a bigger wall, making more security measures, making it harder to cross over into Israel, despite the fact that 20,000, before October 7th, 20,000 Gazans a day still crossed over the border for work and had work permits. It's now been suggested that many of them were involved in the attack and in orchestrating the attack on October 7th. So every time Israel allows anyone in, they end up with violence. And another point that is often made is, well, the West Bank, parts of the West Bank are under military occupation. And that is absolutely true. But again, it's people are not seeing this the other way around. Well, the Palestinians have a right, or the Gazans, the Hamas, which are all different things, right, have the right to violent resistance because of this military occupation. And it's actually the other way around. The military occupation is because of the violent resistance. Nobody sees it through, again, because they have this very clear oppressor framework. They can't see how Israel is justified in any of their actions. And since leaving Gaza in 2004, Israel has just gotten more and more and more violence, right? They completely left the area and the violence has increased towards Israel. So it was quite an unpopular decision for Israel to leave Gaza in 2004. But once we left and all of this like rain of violence came down on us, then the proposal of leaving the West Bank, which was on the table at the time, completely came off the table. It was completely like, there's no way we're doing this because we'll just end up with another Gaza. We'll just end up with another Hamas. We need to stop that from happening. But again, through this kind of post-colonial, postmodern framework that a lot of people in the West are operating with, they aren't able to see how Israel's actions are justified. Yet they're constantly playing this game of leapfrog. Anything that Hamas do, it's like, well, they must have a good reason. It's because of this. It's because the Israelis did that. But the same logic never works the other way around, where you say, well, why did the Israelis impose an embargo? Why did the Israelis build a big fucking wall? Why did the Israelis occupy it? And that's another point, when the West Bank was actually, it's confusing because it's actually on the east side of Israel. It's the West Bank of Jordan, and it was given to the Arabs. It was under Arab control after the UN 47 petition. It came under Israeli control because the Arabs launched a war, remember that war when Israel was 1 day old, on Israel, and then Israel fought and won a defensive war in which it claimed the West Bank, right? It claimed that land, and that's how Israel came to control the West Bank. Prior to that, it didn't control the West Bank. So again, like this, the occupation of the West Bank, but nobody asks, well, why did the Israelis occupy the West Bank, and why do they not leave the West Bank? But again, as long as you can only see things in black and white and oppressor and oppressed, then you can't see how Israel has any right to do anything. I want to move on because I've made this point previously, some of these points previously. But the other thing that I want to address is how so many people are measuring this in terms of body count. I actually saw someone on the news the other day that said, okay, well, they killed 1,400 Israelis and you've now killed 4,500 Palestinians and Gazans, right? Aren't you even? Can't you stop now? And when you frame it this way, okay, you killed X number of our civilians, so we're going to kill X number of your civilians, right? That's how a lot of people are framing this. And this is not what's happening, okay? You got to stop thinking about proportionality and saying, okay, what's a proportionate response for Israel? And start thinking about the intentions of each side, okay? The goal of Hamas is to kill every single Jew, not just in the land of Israel, but worldwide, right? That is their goal. That is their intention. And for those of you who defend it and say, no, it's not, or that's not what they mean, or it's literally written in their charter and they say it over and over and over again, right? This isn't Israeli propaganda. This is literally, when people tell you who they are and what they want to do, you should listen to them. And we live in this bizarre time where, you can literally be fined and lose your job for accidentally getting someone's pronouns wrong, because they are, if they are non-binary or transgender or, gender non-conforming, then they are oppressed, right? And so, and you as a straight, like, whatever, a straight non-transgender person, you are the oppressor. And you can literally lose your job for accidentally getting their pronouns wrong, because they are oppressed and you are, by definition, if you're not oppressed, you're part of the oppressor class. But when people go out in the street and literally say, we want to kill Jews, like our goal is to kill as many Jews as possible, when they say this, when they have like an actual charter that this is a part of, we downplay it, right? And again, part of all of this identity politics and woke politics is all about language and manipulating language. And we've heard time and time and time again from the woke left that language is violence, right? And we keep hearing about hate crimes or hate speech, and literally getting someone's pronouns wrong is considered by some to be hate speech. But going out and saying you want to kill Jews, they're like, oh no, well, they must have a reason, right? Because they're seen as oppressed, then there's always a reason why they must feel this way. And so we have to sort of excuse any behavior is acceptable because they are seen through this oppressed lens. And it's very, very, very black and white. And all responsibility is taken out of this, all personal responsibility is taken out of this equation. Again, why hasn't Hamas over the past 18 years used all the funding and all the aid that they've been given to build a state? I don't know why they haven't done that. They just built infrastructure to kill Jews instead. But yet certain people on the left in the West are saying it's okay, that they have a reason to do it. They have just reason to do it. And if you buy into this oppressed, postmodern way of thinking, then that's how you're going to see the world. But if you don't buy into it, and if you think, no, actually personal responsibility comes into this, and you actually have to, even if you are, the underdog, even if you are oppressed, you have to actually do things to improve your lot in life. And it doesn't excuse any behavior whatsoever, and that you can become a perpetrator if you do certain things. Like if that is your way of thinking, then you're not buying into this woke postmodern way of looking at things. Another example is that we have known since the 1970s that serial killers and people who do really awful things to people, like beheading them and like awful sexual crimes, torture, these really infamous serial killers that we've seen in the West since the 1970s, we know that they are usually abused as children, and they normally have a horrific childhood. But we still put them in prison. We still say you can't behave this way in society, and there is a punishment for it. Okay, so even though you had a horrible childhood, we don't see you as an oppressor. As oppressed. We see you as an oppressor. And often, it has to be said, there are these sort of serial killers, and they are white men who are, no matter what, always seen as part of an oppressor class. So if you're a white man and you commit a murder, we don't say, oh, well, hang on a second, maybe it's because he had a rough childhood. We put that man in prison, unless he says that he's transgender, and then we put him in a woman's prison. But let's not get into that. But the same is not done when somebody is seen as simply oppressed. So Hamas is being viewed through this Western lens of being simply oppressed, and and they did the most horrendous acts of violence on October 7th. I mean, if you need reminding, they they did things like they tied up. There was one particular scenario where they tied the parents up back to back to each other on one side of the room, and then they tied the two children in the family on the other side of the room, and then they tortured them while the others were watching. So they took the father's eye out, they cut the children's fingers off, and then they burnt the children alive. And we don't know if it was before or after killing the parents. They cut like fetuses out of pregnant women, beheaded them, and then killed the pregnant women. They gang raped women and broke their pelvises, often raping them next to dead corpses of their husbands and their friends. The most horrific acts of violence. But there are actually people in the world who say, well, what do you expect? This is what happens when you oppress people. And they're actually justifying these actions because they're saying these people are oppressed. Now, I've already made my case for why I don't think these people are oppressed by Israel. But even if they were, we cannot use this lens to justify this kind of violence and this kind of actions towards others. And if you are on that side of saying, okay, well, if somebody's oppressed, they get to do whatever they want to whoever they want, right? Like I have serious questions about your morality. Anyway, going back to the body count, right, where we're saying, okay, well, you've killed this many and they killed this many, so now you're even, so now you just stop. You've got to look at the intentions of each side. The intention of Hamas is to kill every single Jew in Israel and to take all of the land, right? They do not recognize Israel's right to exist and Jews' right to exist at all, let alone on this land. The intentions of the Israeli army is to destroy Hamas and to destroy all of its, to kill its major leaders and to destroy all of its infrastructure. The problem that it's facing is that they're hiding behind their civilian population because they want as many casualties as possible. And I don't know if you just heard that, but massive booms overhead as I was just filming this. Again, that's Hamas still bombing civilian areas. I live in a very rural area. There's nobody here for them to bomb, like nobody of importance for them to bomb, but we're still getting hundreds of rockets a day from Hamas in these civilian areas. Anyway, I was talking about the intentions of each side. Now, Sam Harris has used this thought experiment where he said, all we have to do is imagine what each side would do if they could do anything they wanted to the other side. So Hamas has told us what they would do, and they've shown us what they would do. If they had the power, right, Israel is stronger than Hamas. Israel has more military power than Hamas, right? If Hamas were able to, they would kill every single Jew in Israel, probably torturing them to death, right? Until all of them were dead. And we know that. We don't have to guess because they say it. And then when they get the opportunity, they do it. What would Israel do if it had the power to kill every single Palestinian, like not just Gazan, but every single Arab in the land of Israel, in the West Bank, in Gaza? Well, we know the answer to that because Israel has the power to do it. Israel could literally kill every single Palestinian alive today, and they could have done so 50 years ago, but they haven't, right? So you don't have to think very hard about what each side would do if they had the power to, because we've got one side telling us what they would do, like advertising it, and the other side, saying, no, we don't want to kill Palestinians. Everyone's saying, yes, you do, yes, you do, yes, you do. Well, we have the power to kill all the Palestinians, and we're not doing it. We haven't done it. So people are not recognizing this asymmetry in the intentions of either side. It's being called a genocide or ethnic cleansing. But again, if Israel really wanted a genocide of all the Arabs in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, they could do it tomorrow. And I want to use the numbers just to demonstrate this to you for a moment, because the body count in Gaza is horrendous, and it's awful, the number of civilians that are dying. Nobody denies that. Everyone in Israel laments that fact, okay? The numbers currently, the last numbers that I heard is that there are 4,500 Gazans, innocent Gazans dead. Now, like, that number also comes from the Hamas Health Authority. I can't remember the exact name of it. They are not necessarily reliable, and that's not necessarily, they tend to inflate numbers. But let's take their number. Okay, let's say it was 4,500. Israel so far has dropped 7,000 bombs on Gaza, right? That means that they're not even managing to kill one person per bomb that they drop, right? These are insane numbers, right? You should be able to blow up 1,000 people with a single bomb, but they are not managing. I mean, it's almost like half the amount, right? They always, every 2 bombs, they're killing one person. It's almost to that extent, right? And the reason for that is that Israel are targeting Hamas infrastructure and leaders, and they are asking civilians to get out of the way. They're telling them what they're going to bomb and when. And for the large part, yes, there is absolute devastation. They are destroying a lot of buildings in Gaza, and a lot of people's homes. But that's what happens when you set up a rocket launcher in someone's living room, okay? When does it stop becoming someone's living room and it starts being a target, a Hamas target that Israel is taking out? So again, you have to look at the intentions of either side. Hamas, like you just heard, or I hope you heard it on the recording, they are still bombing us indiscriminately in civilian areas across all of Israel, all day, every day, right? They're trying to get something through to kill civilians, whereas Israel are targeting, again, the intentions are different. They are targeting Hamas targets and infrastructure and trying to kill key Hamas leaders. So the intentionality on each side is totally different. But again, people using this postmodern framework are simply saying, well, Hamas, what do you expect? Hamas has a right to still be bombing Israel, but that Israel should stop and that Israel should have restraint. And I understand the desire to prevent civilian lives being lost, but Israel is doing everything that it can to do that. The fact that it's dropped 7,000 bombs and only 4,500 people have died, I mean, it shows how carefully they are targeting these targets, because otherwise they could have killed all 2 million Gazans by now. And just while we're on the numbers, I just want to point out another really crazy way that the numbers don't add up. So the count so far is that 1,400 Israelis were killed in the massacre on October 7th. But it's estimated that some 5,000 Gazans came through into Israel on that day. And some of them were Hamas terrorists, but there were an awful lot of just normal civilian Gazans who just came in to take advantage of the situation, to rape, to destroy homes, to torture people. It's quite incredible that 5,000 of them came in with the goal of killing as many Israelis as possible, and they only managed to kill 1,400. And I think it was probably because, my guess is that they were so busy burning homes down, torturing people, raping people, and taking hostages, that they didn't get anywhere near the extent of damage or a loss of civilian life that they were planning on doing. So that's just another bit of food for thought there. So what I've tried to highlight in this podcast episode is why this postmodern woke identity politics lens is causing many Westerners to see this situation as a very black and white situation of oppressor and oppressed. And I've tried to explain some of the ways where it just simply is not that simple. I've also explained why I think even if you can or should identify someone as the oppressed, why that doesn't give them license to do anything that they want to do. And I've also explained many of the ways in which Israelis are the oppressed and Jews are the oppressed, and how we have distorted and revised history to make them look like the oppressors. But I want to finish with something. Something that keeps getting brought up is this point about the cycle of violence. I've seen a lot of people say, okay, well, the thing is that by Israel even if Israel are justified in what they're doing in Gaza right now, right, which you can argue whether they are or not, it's not going to help, because all it's going to do is create a new generation of frustrated, angry men who are going to create a new Hamas and continue the cycle of violence and revenge on Israel. So Israel should show restraint and think about its actions in Gaza on that basis, because this is just going to make things worse. And to a large degree, I agree with that. But here's the thing. I've been in Israel for 14 years, and I've listened to Israelis argue at length. I mean, I've always joked that, you know, if you've got 6 Jews or Israelis in a room, you've got 8 opinions. Like, everyone always disagrees on how things should be run and how things should be done. And I've heard insane amounts of Israelis say, you know, we need to give them their land. Most Israelis want a 2-state solution. And there are many Israelis, especially those on the left, who are like, we've got to give them what they want. We've got to give them a state. We've got to give them freedom. We've got to get out of the West Bank, for example. Many Israelis are against the settlements, myself included, which I haven't spoken about here. But it is an issue, and it is something that Israel is doing wrong and should be, you know, should think really long and hard about. But the current Israeli mentality, like, you have to understand how Israelis feel. They're like, we have watched. As it doesn't seem to matter what we do and what Israel does, you always just get more violence. So we gave them Gaza in 2004. We pulled out unilaterally. We didn't get anything in return for that. And look what they've done. They've just turned it into like ISIS right on our doorstep. They just have these waves. They spend all their time and all their aid just creating infrastructure to kill us. Like, even when we give them everything that they've asked for and everything they want, we give them their own state, we give them their own land, we get out of it, we displace all the Jews living there. This is what they give us, right? You've got to understand the Israeli mentality now is like, well, when we give them what they want, they give us violence. When we fight back, they give us violence. So we might as well just fight back. And this time it feels very, very different. Right? I've been in Israel through many wars and attacks, and Israeli society has always been divided around me. Like, the people around me have been like, well, let's not do this, or let's give them that because we want peace, right? Whereas even those people this time around are saying nothing works, so let's just destroy Hamas. Like, full support to completely dismantle Hamas and do whatever needs to be done. Like, this war is not over until Hamas is destroyed. And you can, again, if you're seeing this through the oppressor-oppressed lens, you're not going to agree with that. But if you see from the Israeli mentality of like, well, when we give them peace, we don't get anything in return anyway. So why give them peace? Why not just put our security first, completely dismantle and destroy Hamas, make sure that we're safe, make sure that what happened on October the 7th can never happen again to any of us? Why not just do that? Because we're going to get violence either way. They're going to hate us either way. They're going to want to kill us either way. So why not just make sure that we're safe and not worry about them? That is the Israeli mentality right now. And hopefully I've explained why that mentality is there. Again, Israelis are not saying, let's go and rape and behead them just like they did to us. There's nobody saying that. Nobody is saying that. Everyone, and people are on all sides, nobody's saying let's just kill all the Palestinians, let's just kill all the Gazans, let's just bomb them all. Nobody's saying that. They're just saying let's do everything we can to kill Hamas. Let's try to keep to prevent as many civilian deaths as possible, but there's nothing we can do about it. Hamas are using them as human shields, so some of them are going to die. They started this war. We are much stronger, and there is a sense of like, if you poke the bear, you are going to get attacked, right? Like Hamas has known for a long time that Israel is far bigger and far more powerful than Hamas, and that Israel can destroy Hamas if they want to. And so there is an element of like, well, you started this war, you did this, now you're going to get our reaction, okay? And for us, it's justified. As per usual, this was a much longer podcast than I wanted it to be, but what I really hope to get across is how this postmodern woke way of thinking, this identity politics, this oppressor and oppressed, is being applied to this situation. And hopefully I've given you some food for thought about how it's applied to other situations as well, and why I don't think it is a good way of organizing society. I don't think it's a good way of organizing politics, and I do not think it's a good way of organizing our morality and moral thought. Hopefully you agree with me. If you don't, write in the comments below, talk to me, let's discuss it. Thanks for listening.